Good afternoon to our distinguished members of the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity, to our guests in the room, to our guests online. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our launch meeting of the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity. We are honored that you would spend time with us, and especially honored to those members who are joining us at this table for the launch of this important committee. My name is Irene Marion. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the director of the Departmental Office of Civil Rights here at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Our mission is rooted in the principles of equity and inclusion, and the Advisory Committee on Transportation Equity is a pivotal table and instrument for realizing this work and mission. The purpose of today's meeting is multifaceted. First, we will aim to discuss the Advisory Committee's mission and the role it plays in the work that we are doing here at the Department to advance transportation equity solutions. This meeting serves as a platform for meaningful discussion and collaboration involving not just our committee members, but also the broader community and members of the public. We will explore the comprehensive work that we have carried out as a department to date and begin to discuss the role that this committee will play to advise the Secretary and the department in the work ahead. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us. We are here to do the work of the American public. And there's no better person to start us off in this meeting than a champion for the people and a champion for transportation equity. I'm pleased to introduce Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who will open today's meeting.
Oh. Well, thank you, Irene, for your introduction, for your great work, Christopher, and all of my colleagues, many of whom are joining, for what you have done to help bring us to this day. And most importantly, thank you to each of the members of this advisory committee for taking on this responsibility for this public service. Thank you in advance for the sprint we are going to ask you to undertake and the work that it is going to entail. It is incredibly important. And I want to say a special thank you to my predecessor, Secretary Anthony Foxx, somebody who both by means of his advice and counsel and by way of his example has made me a better secretary and this a better department. And we are very much in his debt in many ways. And of course, it's fitting that he is chairing this committee since he is responsible for creating it under his leadership when he was leading this department. He is somebody who paved the way, pun not intended, but I'm sure he, like me, found you can't go very far in this line of work without a transportation metaphor crossing your lips. But really paved the way, opened these paths that we are going down now, laid out topics that were at the time considered novel, maybe even newfangled, and to some who were not thoughtful enough might have been considered extraneous to transportation policy, but which we rightly recognize are at the very core of doing our work well. So I want to thank and acknowledge Secretary Foxx for everything that you have done during and since your tenure here at the department and leading this committee. Likewise, Stephanie Gideby-Jones, fellow charter member of the Difficult to Pronounce Name Club, like me, your leadership and your experience is going to be incredibly important to us, as is that of each of the members of this committee, some of whom I've had the chance to work with before and some of whom I'm just getting to know. I find myself from time to time being asked by skeptical members of the media or elected officials what equity even means. And in the course of answering that question, always return to the touchstone of fairness, which is also one of the basic values that we guide our work by here as a department. And it's especially important to pay attention to fairness for those of us who have worked in transportation enough to be conscious of how transportation plays such a huge role in whether people can prosper, what kind of places you can work, what kinds of places you can live, whether you have access to basic necessities like healthy food and medical care, what kind of education is available to your kids. These kinds of things very much depend on your access, your equitable and affordable access, your safe access to transportation, or the lack thereof. And it's why the work of this committee is so important, focusing on how to build and establish safer, cleaner, more accessible transportation systems that do, in fact, connect people, not divide them, and that do so in ways that leave nobody behind. It's especially puzzling that some of those who are skeptical of the importance of equity in our work are from areas, sometimes rural areas, that will stand to benefit from your work. Every gap, every unfair gap, whether it be between black and white, between the disability community and the rest of the traveling public, or between rural and urban, can be addressed through this work. And I believe, given the proportions of what we are building under President Biden's leadership with the infrastructure law, that future historians will be able to write about this period, the 2020s, and say that the proportions of that work and the intentionality around how that work was done is part of why in the 2020s we saw those gaps begin to close. That's what success looks like for our country if we get the 2020s right. And a big part of that has to do with transportation. And of course, even a superficial attention to the history of civil rights and the struggle for justice in this country would leave no room to ignore the centrality of transportation to that. The Montgomery bus boycotts, to take just one example, being one of the signal events in the struggle for justice and equality in this country. So under President Biden's leadership, we are determined to build transportation networks that work for everybody, both in building them up with good paying jobs that are available to people whether or not they have a college degree, but that require skill and require access to building those skills, through affordable public transportation that connects people to opportunities, and through smart and responsible investments in every kind of community, rural and urban, black and brown and white, rich and poor. Every corner of this country deserves equitable access to transportation. Now, in our discretionary funding, we are combining unprecedented levels of investment with a focus on making sure that those investments reach the very communities that have been left in the past. For example, we recently announced our latest round of awards from the RAISE program, formerly known as BUILD, formerly known as Tiger, totaling over $2 billion. And 70% of the projects that we funded were in historically underserved communities, like Orangeburg, South Carolina, where we're building a new bridge and a transit hub to connect two HBCUs to the downtown business district. We made progress on road safety, mindful of the reality that black and native and Latino and rural communities are experiencing the highest rates of traffic deaths in the country. So through our National Roadway Safety Strategy and new programs like our Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, we're improving safety along some of the most dangerous roadways in the country, like Roosevelt Boulevard in Philadelphia, where we're helping to install dedicated bike lanes and building new medians and upgrading traffic signals. And we've launched completely new initiatives, like our Reconnecting Communities program, which looks specifically at those neighborhoods and those places who have been divided by the transportation decisions in the past, and funds community-driven efforts to reconnect them to jobs and opportunities, like in Buffalo, New York, where we're helping to cap part of the Kensington Expressway, which slices like a gash through parts of Buffalo, moving it effectively underground, and then creating new crossings and park space on top of it. And it bears mentioning that the Reconnecting Communities program was created by a bipartisan majority in the United States Congress under President Biden's leadership, and that when we do this work, it makes everyone better off and it makes nobody worse off. No one alive today is necessarily responsible for the origins of the inequities that we have inherited. But everybody who is alive today and in a position of responsibility is accountable for what we do about them. That's why we are here. And that's why we're undertaking this kind of work. And that's where you come in. The 24 distinguished members of this group were selected from nearly 250 applicants. You represent an enormous concentration of intellect and experience, some of the best minds in transportation from the private sector, the advocacy world, from labor, from academia, from every level of government. You are experts in design and planning, in policy and organizing, in community engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility, and we're depending on that expertise and depending on your unique perspectives to help this department to make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity. So you will be asked to document the realities that are around us, to deliberate bold ideas, to consider new strategies, to bring us real examples of where our work is helping and of where we need to do better. And we're asking you to consider what type of infrastructure we should be building for future generations, not as a theoretical exercise about what might be, but as a very real opportunity to shape very real work of proportions that we've not been able to do in our lifetime. It won't be easy. We are working to change patterns of exclusion that have literally been cemented into American life for generations. But if we get this moment right, we will be creating new opportunities, creating new wealth, and breathing new life into communities that will benefit from it for many generations to come, because that's how long infrastructure decisions last. So I want to thank you again for being here today. I want to thank you for lending your talents to this incredibly important work. And on behalf of the President, I am thankful for your invaluable contributions. And on behalf of myself and the department, really looking forward to our work together. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce again our Chair, Secretary Anthony Foxx, and our Vice Chair, Stephanie Gedebe Jenkins. Thank you for your leadership. And I'm looking forward to seeing where you take this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is a momentous moment for the country, for this department, for this committee. And we thank you for your leadership, Mr. Secretary. We know we owe you a piece of work in the relatively near future. We will work as hard, as expeditiously, and as well as we possibly can to deliver that product to you, sir. Thank you.